Hello, Mzansi. You are listening to Farmers Inside Track, proudly brought to you by Food for Mzansi. Patricia Tembo here, and welcome to episode 523. Today, we're looking at Geographic Information Systems and how this technology is helping farmers make informed and calculated decisions in their production practices. This episode is set to be both informative and practical as we welcome Dr. Tara Southey, who is a post-doctoral researcher at Stellenbosch University and the founder of TerraClim. Dr. Tara Southey, welcome to Food for Mzansi's Farmers Inside Track podcast. We're glad to have you on this episode.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I really look forward to chatting to you guys.
So, Dr. Southey, you are the founder and CEO of TerraClim, as well as a postdoctoral researcher at Stellenbosch University. But for our audience who may not be familiar with TerraClim and the work that you are doing, could you please give us a brief overview just of your role in the agricultural industry?
Yes, wonderful. It's so cool to be here to discuss the topic of GIS, which very much underpins TerraClim. So TerraClim is a spin-out company from Stellenbosch University. It originated from the name Terrain and Climate, and it's the integration of the two, where we use softwares like GIS to create a new solution, which we deem as a forward farming solution in agriculture. So TerraClim is a spin-out company from Stellenbosch University. It was underpinned with an extensive amount of research from my master's, and then went on to doing my PhD, and then my postdoc, and then we realized that this is a real need in the agricultural sector, and the agricultural sector asking for the specifics of access to climate data, access to rain information, which are derivatives from a GIS technology. So that's where TerraClim came about. And the impact that we make in agriculture at the moment is starting to understand the impact of climate change, looking at how do you adapt to climate change? How do you align yourself with your climate vulnerabilities? And to do that, you first and foremost need to understand what is your climate vulnerability in your specific area. And to do that, you need access to climate data. So as TerraClim, we integrate multiple weather station data into one centralized environment. So we work with private sector and public sector weather station data custodians, such as Metos South Africa, iLeaf, Vital, South African Weather Services, Agricultural Research Council. We centralize that information into a centralized database, and then we take those points and we create temperature maps. And we have temperature maps for your farm at an hourly, daily, and monthly timestamp. And then we compile those per crop type. And then we can start seeing what areas are getting hotter, what areas are getting colder. And it's not just about the maximum and the minimum, but it's really about starting to look at how many hours in the hotter profile, how many hours in the cooler profiles, which then has a direct impact on plant expression. And what does your harvest look like? What is the size of your potato tubers? What is the quality of your wine grapes at harvest? So that is TerraClim integrating multiple data sources into a decision-making point. And that's really extremely valuable for where we're at with agriculture today. A lot of data sets are standalone. You only look at climate, or you only look at soil, or you only look at water use. But if you look at all of them together, you get very effective and interesting insights as to what the problem is and how you can better farm.
I really like that you mentioned that TerraClim is a holistic solution to adapting to climate change as well. And I suppose going right into our topic at hand is to provide context on what GIS is and its role in farm management.
Great. So GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. And my go-to answer for what is GIS is that it is a software tool that can answer any questions starting with where. So for an agriculture in general, these questions often include things like, where are the most fertile soils in a region or district? Where is the risk of frost, drought, and flooding the highest? Where are rain patterns changing over time? Where do different crops perform best across landscapes? So it's really answering the where question because it's geographic and it's an information system. So you're able to stack multiple layers on top of one another. So it's a software that you log into and you load different layers, and layers being a digital elevation model. So it's a model of the Earth's surface, and there's contours, every contour that goes up with height. So you end up using geographic information systems to stack information that can represent the Earth or represent seasons.
And maybe for our listeners, I know like myself, not very tech savvy, if it's possible to maybe explain what components are used in GIS technologies, basically.
It all starts with the digital elevation model, which is a model of the Earth's surface. So there's some freely available ones at 90 meters and 30 meters called an SRTM, which you can Google. And you download those and then you looking at terrain derivatives. So you've got a model of the Earth's surface and then you run in Geographic Information Systems, you run terrain modeling. And then it looks at from the Earth's surface, from the digital elevation model, you'll then get a surface of a slope percentage of a piece of land. You'll get an aspect of the land. So where the north facing, south facing, east facing, west facing slopes. You'll get a model of elevation, which is a really important layer. So that is, how does your elevation from sea level increase to the tops of the mountain? You'll get something like contours, which is a lot of agriculture is planted in alignment with contours. So this information you stack in GIS. So what we do with GIS and TerraClim is we take weather station point data and then we run spatial interpolation algorithms. So it's got inverse distance weighting or kriging or different ones in the Geographic Information System interface. And you can take points and create maps. So if you've got leaf source sample data for multiple points, you can do heat maps. So you can start seeing where the samples got higher concentration or low concentration on a farm. It's a really nice tool to use to start creating maps of point data. And it's a different way of looking at data. So what are the components of GIS tools that can be used in farming today? Mm-hmm. So when we start looking at, we ingest weather station points. So you get data for the last year or the last day, and you put, say, 5 points into this Geographic Information System, and then we do spatial interpolations from that. And in GIS, there's some generic ones called inverse distance weighting, kriging, that you can run on these points, or you could make heat maps, which shows you the warmest part of your farm, the coldest part of your farm. You could put foliar application into your GIS system, or if you've just taken soil samples or you've taken leaf samples for your season, you can put that in GIS and then see what is the distribution of concentrates from one part of the farm to another. It's a really nice way to just visually review your farm, looking at a map, where are the high areas, low areas. So TerraClim is essentially a GIS tool. Our TerraClim web interface was created for that, to give farmers access to climate and terrain information the way you would have in a GIS interface. And the idea is that you can click layers on and off. So sometimes you can have an NDVI image, which is a natural vegetation index image, which you get from Sentinel, which you can also pull into GIS. It's another component, pulling in remote sensing data into GIS. A lot of people start there. And within TerraClim and other GIS interfaces, you want to understand, why is your natural vegetation index higher? Why are you getting more growth? And sometimes that links to in one part of your block and not the other part of your farm. You can start looking at, there could be more temperature, heat units in the upper part of the farm than the lower part of the farm. Or you can have one part of your field that's just not performing well. And you can go and look at the different GIS layers. Is it clay percentage? Is it underground water? A really nice index in GIS is called terrain wetness index that you can use for decision making too. So there's a lot of components that you can centralize into a GIS infrastructure, and it's all spatial. So you're talking maps. So when you say GIS, you talk maps. It's called TIFFs when they're exports.
We have a lot of farmers who are listening to the podcast who, are wanting to integrate, technology and new things. So for a farmer who has no idea where to start with GIS and where the starting point is, what would your advice be?
So my advice for wanting to start using GIS would be that there are some free options available. So they've developed through online open source communities, and it's called QGIS. It's a free GIS platform. Anybody can use it. Anybody can download it and use it. And it's not that computationally heavy too on your actual computer. So it runs on multiple platforms. It supports numerous GIS formats and has most of the functionality that the paid GIS softwares also do, which is Esri and other solutions. So getting started can be a bit daunting at the beginning. And granted, I was also a bit overwhelmed at the beginning, and I did a few courses just to familiarize myself with the tool. But there are also a lot of tutorials online, like so many, which can step you through and step any new user through how can you use QGIS. And when you have any problems, you could just say, how do I convert this file to this format? Or how do I do this from this? And there's a YouTube clip showing it. So there's a lot out there. There's a large community of global users who regularly answer questions users post on the forums. So you can really get stuck into pretty quickly just using a quick Google search and it will give you answers. And also with ChatGPT and all that where it's at, it's very easy to get started. So my team uses QGIS extensively in all of their GIS work, generate maps with it. And it really just starts with download QGIS and start playing. And then it starts with what input layers. And that's also something you can Google. What are the best input layers if we want to look at land use? And then you can find freely available digital elevation models. As I mentioned before, SRTM. You download it, you put it into your QGIS, could be your first layer that you put in. And then you start looking at calculate terrain indexes. So it can calculate your slope percentage on your farm. It can calculate your aspect on your farm. And that is very amazing. You can start contacting companies like TerraClim and ask for some long-term climate layers. There's also a lot of open source long-term climate layers that are available. There's a layer called Schulze, freely available long-term climate layer for the whole of South Africa. And then you also start talking about resolutions. So resolution is what is the pixel size? Like I said, the SRTM is a 30-meter resolution. So for every 30 meters on your piece of land or your farm, you'll get a new slope percentage or new aspect reading, new terrain wetness index, underground water. So it's as simple as starting there and just starting to have this information on your farm, starting to see. So if you look at something like aspect represents how the sun hits the Earth's surface. So north-facing slopes are generally warmer, south-facing slopes are cooler, and then you get morning sun slopes, afternoon sun slopes. And it's really important to just understand your farm. It's really what this GIS tool does. It comes across overwhelming and complex, but just download QGIS and start playing with it and search online. Where can I find an open source climate layer? Where can I find an open source digital elevation model? And that's where you start, digital elevation model. And this can really be used to improve your decision making on farm level, especially when you want to start looking at your crop planning, your land use. And that's where you can start bringing in NDVIs through Sentinel Hub. It's also an online platform. There's a lot of free open source remote sensing information. So remote sensing is the satellites take an image of the Earth's surface and all of that repository sits somewhere and we can bring that into an interface and start using it for decision making. So that's where you can start looking at your crop planning. And if you look at NDVI images on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, you can start seeing where is higher vigor, lower vigor, where am I going to harvest first or later? That's pretty much where it starts. And in QGIS, you can also map out your farm and you could look at farm portions. There is a solution in the Western Cape, which is very nice, called Cape Farm Mapper. It's endorsed by the Western Cape government and it's got really nice layers on that interface. Something like cadastral layers. If you want to start hovering over and seeing what is my farm portion, you can go into Cape Farm Mapper and hover and see this is my farm portion. You can go into your QGIS and you can digitize it. They also have some features that you can export GIS formatted maps and things into like shape files. Is what GIS is. And then if QGIS is also great if you get the simplicity of someone asks you for a KML and you only have a shapefile, then you can Google, how do I transfer a shapefile into a KML using QGIS? And it takes you through a step-by-step tutorial. And then you can open up your maps that you've created in QGIS in Google Maps or something else. So it's a really nice interface. It's consistently improving because it's got an open source community that keeps improving QGIS interface. So everybody listening to this podcast should download QGIS right now and start using it. If you're a farmer, it is amazing.
Great stuff. So QGIS is a starting tool, I suppose. And you mentioned Cape Farm Mapper. I was exposed to it in my undergrad. So if I could figure it out, I'm quite sure that's also a very useful tool for farmers in applying GIS with their farm planning. You've already spoken about GIS data and how it can improve decision-making on a farm. So from a cost-benefit perspective, how does GIS technology impact profitability from what you've seen?
So for us, the profitability using technology it goes hand in hand. And I think the caveat here is that technology takes time. So to sit as a farmer and map your farm takes time. But if you are a farmer, you need to know your farm. And the best place to start is walk the farm, you know the farm. And then QGIS is just a technology that can take your hand and help you along. And sometimes we have scenarios where there's a field and you're wanting to harvest that field as one field, but actually that field should be two fields purely based on a terrain variable that you wouldn't have seen unless you used digital elevation models and something like terrain wetness index. So there might be a slight amount of underground water, and that results in higher vigor in the bottom of the block and less upper part of the block. So you should harvest it in 2 units, and that could drive better profitability. And it really aligns with how do you expend your fertilizers and your spray materials and things throughout your farm, that you don't just apply the same thing to the whole block or the same thing to the whole farm. It's really using technology to see where are the weaker areas and the stronger areas and changing your application in alignment with that. And that naturally drives better economic outputs. So there's a significant cost benefits to that. GIS is extremely important when it comes to planting decision making. And that's really what birthed TerraClim is. Just before you start planting, whether it's a tree or a grain, you need to do an extensive amount of analysis to see what is my environment, what is the soil, what is my solar radiation, what is my aspect, my temperature profiling. And you need a GIS technology specialist to do that for you. But today where technology is at, I think it's a great starting point to just start mapping your farm and looking at what's viable, not viable. I'd still advise getting consultants in to help you interpret a lot of this information. But technology aligns with profitability and improves decision making just through effective planning at the beginning. How do you soil preparations? What do you plant when? And how's that crop going to fare over time? Whether it's an annual crop or whether it's a crop that you're going to plant for the next 30 years, you really want to make a wise and effective decision. And that's where TerraClim starts using technology and GIS technology to start looking at where do sites work and why are they working, and looking at the environmental profile, then seeing if we can find other sites with a similar environmental profile to expand that crop type, knowing that it will then work, because that's where profitability lies, is that your input costs are once off, but your returns are long term.
I'm thinking that GIS falls under precision agriculture. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. It's a buzzword and it's what farmers are looking to apply to their farming practices. So how do GIS technologies integrate with other precision tools such as drones and automated irrigation systems, remote sensors, things like that?
As I say, GIS is a software. So it's a software that integrates with other softwares. And when you fly your drone, you're essentially getting lots of little points, which then become a map. And that is what you would then put into GIS. You get remote sensing such as land surface temperature or NDVIs. You can take those layers and put them straight into your GIS software. And then what that does is it's Geographic Information Systems. So it starts geographically stacking all these layers. Whenever there's a GPS location, you can use GIS, but you have to have a geographical location to pin it down. And so a fantastic tool when you start using drones and the drone layer into your GIS platform with your digital elevation model, and then possibly even some soil samples that you took or leaf samples that you took on top of that. And then you can start seeing my drone image says this, the leaf sample said this. So if my drone image, because then all these images are classified into things called legends. So it's a color schematic. So you put a drone image in and it would have red zones, green zones, orange zones. And then you would go take soil samples or leaf samples or any samples on those areas. And then you'd start calibrating your drone image that every time you fly a drone, if it's red, you know it's low vigor. It's a plant in distress. It's green, it's fine. That's where you start integrating all these technologies. And the greatest value in GIS is ground truthing. And that's where TerraClim has been a forerunner in that, where we ground truth all our spatial maps with actual weather station data. So we don't just map and interpolate and model. We actually look at what does the ground truth data say at specific weather stations. So when putting all these sensors and technologies in, you as a farmer can go out and take a few samples and understand why is this part of the image red and that part green. It's very effective. And that is where precision comes in, because you as a farmer then start having a stronger handle on understanding how your crop's responding in relation to your land and in relation to the environments and the different seasons.
Thank you, Dr. Southey. And, you know, with the data that is obtained as farmers use the software, is there support perhaps from TerraClim in interpreting the data, thinking of maybe farmers who are not as confident in reading the values or the data that they're getting from the software? What sort of assistance is available in that regard?
Absolutely. So again, YouTube, these open platforms and open source communities are extremely effective. A lot of my team use a lot of these open source communities on a daily basis, but there's a lot out there that can be researched and understood, and it is overwhelming to interpret a map. So we as TerraClim are open and available to set up consultations and talk through it. TerraClim has been set up as a tool to help in the space of geographic information system decision making. So we've already mapped the temperature layers on an hourly, daily, and monthly basis. So you can pan into your farm and you can already see what was my temperature profile. You can pan over different days and months and compare seasons with seasons. And then all the terrain variables are there. And when you hover over each of those terrain variables, you can see aspect means this and slope means this. But again, just looking at the open community platforms that are available. How do I interpret slope? How do I interpret this drone image? How do I interpret an EM38 scan, which is a scan of the soil surface? There's so many tools out there, and it's as simple as just emailing and asking for help and asking for demos. And TerraClim is always open to going out and doing demonstrations of our software and of GIS and of how to interpret it. And I mean, a simple example with GIS is in the TerraClim interface, there's a little toggle that you need to switch on called adaptive view. So when you pan into a new area, the legend adapts. So it means a map is filled with a lot of information and data, but as you zoom in, it recalculates the legend for your specific extent. So if you're looking at the whole of the Western Cape as an example, you might not see a difference on your farm because you're going to see the extreme maximum and minimums. But as soon as you pan into a smaller area, like a region and then a district and then a farm, your maximum and your minimum becomes your farm. So then the color schematic, you start seeing a lot more variances on your farm. And then you'll be able to see these are the cooler profiles, warmer profiles. But if you just had to look at it, and a lot of the maps that are available are very coarse, you're unable to zoom into your farm and see a lot of detail. I mean, there's land surface temperature, remote sensing solutions from Modus and from other ones. There's the Sentinel hub where data can be pulled from. But from an interpretation perspective, I would always recommend potentially going on a course, otherwise just searching online. So there are resources available, institutions and training or skills are available for farmers that want to start using GIS. And there's a lot of GIS lecturers that can walk through tutorials freely available on YouTube, which I'd recommend. You can also go through finding the right one, can be a bit of a mixed bag and difficult. So that's also understandable. So for those looking for a more reasonably priced option, Udemy offers a more structured QGIS training course for users to work through in their own time. And that's around 300 Rand per course. So that's definitely an option. And then formal training is a bit more expensive, but Stellenbosch University and the University of Pretoria offer GIS courses. So that's tailored to non-professionals at around 8,000 Rand per course. And that's normally like an 8-week or a 12-week course. And that's where companies sometimes send their developers on these different courses. So you work on ArcGIS, which is an Esri software, and you work on QGIS. You get training on different GIS softwares, and based on that, the pricing modules shift. So my suggestion for a starting point for a farmer who's interested in getting into a GIS world, it's probably good to start looking into the local branch. It's called GISA, G-I-S-S-A. So that's the Geographic Information Society of South Africa. That interface already has a lot of information. If you want to become a more serious GIS consultant for the agricultural sector, which is always an option for anybody listening, because there's just more and more data out there. So the question is, how do you aggregate it and how do you get intelligence out of all this data? So go look at GISA, the Geo Information Society of South Africa, and providing information and supports to the GIS community in South Africa. That is their role. And they offer a 3-day in-person QGIS training workshop for around 7,000 Rand. So there are options, but again, it's just what does your farming practice look like and how desperately do you need GIS? So you could also sign up to TerraClim at 4,500 Rand a year and get all of this information already processed, ready to use for you as a user. You can just contact us and we can set up a profile. You can set up your own profile for your farm. And if you become a TerraClim member, we also step you through the whole process of how do you use it? How do you profile your farm? How do you digitize it? And it's also a really nice way to familiarize yourself with GIS. And then after that, you can always play with QGIS on the side and eventually transition into only using QGIS in your farming practice. But getting the annual updates of data and layers into your QGIS gets quite tedious and difficult. And that's where interfaces like TerraClim are trying to serve climate data on a daily basis, renewed and updated to every farmer in South Africa to really start informing decision making. So is this chill units accumulation in this season similar to last season? Like, where are we tracking? What does it look like? And with climate change, seasonal variability is our burden, and no season is the same. So getting access to live real-time climate data is really where we need to start looking when we want to start farming.
I'm thinking also, to include livestock farmers. Of course, vegetation and all of that is still very important to livestock farmers. But you did mention heat mapping, for example. I'm thinking that may be something that, would be quite useful for a farmer who's tracking their livestock. Maybe you can speak a little bit more on how GIS is used in livestock management.
Absolutely. I think livestock management GIS is the part that excites me the most. So there's so many options. I mean, there's stock theft as one scenario. So there's a lot of tags and things available today that you can put on your stock. And if you put it on one animal and then the whole herd moves, then you know that there's something not right. And that information can be fed through live into a GIS interface, or it can be fed live through into WhatsApp notifications on your phone. But because there's a GPS linked to the movement of that animal can be mapped. So it's as simple as, depending on the connectivity, it could be just a Wi-Fi link or a data transfer that you transfer that into your GIS and you see how your stock moved from herd to herd. It could be also as simple as setting yourself up in QGIS, mapping your farm. And if you're in an area like the Western Cape, you can find out what your farm portion is using Cape Farm Mapper, or you can contact the municipality. And once you have what is your farm portion, you map that out, and then you can separate your camps into grazing camps. Then you can say the stock will be here for a week, here for a week, here for a week, and you can move your stock throughout your farm. And you can keep a tab on your stock density as well. You can load that into GIS and keep a tab on like how is it moved and tracked. And if you have stock in certain camps and you see like some sheep, they have twins, and you're like, why are they having twins? And it could be the season, it could be where they grazed. And this is really nice for you. You can also bring in NDVI images and you can start looking at biomass indexing. How much grazing do you actually have year on year? And how is climate impacting your grazing? And also using temperature, heat stress maps, drought maps. There's a lot available as well through the Agricultural Research Council. There's a newsletter that they send out called Umlindi. And there's also a droughts interface that they have. And a lot of this information is also available there. But for you as a farmer, you can definitely use GIS to start logging your farm management. And you can also map your water sources and look at your troughs. There's a lot of technology also available where you can put sensors in your water meters that also feed through into your GIS interface. You can then live see it's working or not. There's also so much technology out there today when it comes to building your own software. If you are a livestock farmer, my husband's actually busy playing with it at the moment, and you play with the software and you ask it to create an interface for you. So I want to monitor my stock density and my field capacity over time. What is the best way to do it? And ChatGPT can give you some answers as to how to do it, and sometimes build software for you to do it. It's really amazing where technology is at today. But again, it comes back down to just ensure that you check it and you ground truth it as a farmer. Don't just believe everything you see. You know your land better than anybody else. So for me, yes, you can definitely incorporate stock density, stock movements, and manage your grazing better on your farm. There's a lot of courses available on stock management and looking at your land in relation to your stock and ensuring that you hit the markers of the ESGs, environmental, social governance, and biodynamic farming and regenerative farming. That's really where it's an untapped market that we can monitor better as farmers in South Africa so that we can sell our stock at a better price, purely on how we graze and where we graze and how we map that. So GIS is a powerful tool for any livestock farmer.
I can see how it can be really useful, especially for grazing management, as you mentioned, in planning the rotation, all of that. So
yes,
I think that's quite cool, everything you've mentioned, and just in terms of livestock farming. I'm thinking now of our small scale farmers. What is the minimum farm size, to use GIS and software and technology?
Again, it comes back down to resolution. So you could look at a hectare, could look at 2 hectares, any farm size. It's all just dependent on the type of data that you have. So TerraClim, as an example, does modeling of temperature at a 40-meter resolution, whereas Modus land surface temperature, you're looking at 250 meters. Then there are other sources where you go up to 1.5 kilometers. So you end up getting less pixel values for a field if you go to 1 kilometer layers. Whereas at 40 meters, you can get a lot of variation, even within a hectare, to see what does it look like. And we are now through a project that we're running within the Eastern Cape and then KwaZulu-Natal, funded by the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation, with TIA, looking at building a platform called SASIM, which is a system of all systems to modernize agriculture. The aim of that system is for a small starting out farmer to drop a pin. And as soon as they drop a pin, that's when GIS comes alive. And then you will extract data from CSIR. They've got a system called PIAS, which does remote sensing information, some information from Agricultural Research Council, and then some information from TerraClim into that pin. So you will get basically an environmental profile, more than, say, 20 environmental profiles of what is your frost risk, your climate risk, your drought risk on that specific piece of land that you're about to plant on. And it just gives you insights as to what's happening. And something I really want to encourage farmers to start doing in the context of using GIS, the more you monitor, the more control you have in motivating to an insurance company or to a financier or to an off-taker why your product is better than the surrounding products in the area, or why did you have crop failure? A lot of people are standing account for crop failure as a result of their technique of farming. But sometimes it's just a climate event, or we see in areas climate changing and solar radiation is changing because you've got more overcast days, and then it results in stunted growth in the plants. And then the farmer is held accountable, saying, no, you did something wrong. But actually the farmer didn't. The farmer did nothing wrong. So if a farmer can say, I planted here, this is my conditions, and then you get the natural vegetation index image to say, I did plant, here's my growth, I've just harvested. And if a farmer gets that on GIS over multiple years, or an interface like TerraClim, or a lot of other interfaces out there, the farmer can start seeing, hey, my yield's improving, my practice is improved, I am insurable, or I can get finance, I can expand my farming practice. Transitioning from a small scale farm into the commercial space, tracking your actions and validating that with data is really valuable.
Or maybe looking at how GIS contributes to sustainable agriculture, but I think more specifically in climate resilience, because that's quite a huge issue right now for our farmers here in South Africa. What are you looking forward to seeing in terms of GIS and the work that you're doing now in helping farmers become more climate resilient?
Yeah, climate resilience is my absolute passion, and finding ways to better communicate that and inform decision-making is really what drives us as TerraClim. So for me, starting to understand your climate vulnerability starts with looking at what has happened in your farming community on your 1 hectare of land, or your 5 hectares or 10 or however many. What has happened over the last 5 years? Are you getting more drought events? Are you getting more heat stress events? Do you have more hours above 35? Do you have less? Because literally the temperature profile shifts slightly. So in some areas, spring and October are extremely sensitive to environmental changes season to season. So if you've got a crop that's flowering in that time, you need to start making sure that you've buffered that plant to be able to sustain that kind of variability of extreme temperature fluctuations, like a 20-degree difference between night and day. And plants are adaptable. But for us as growers to start understanding what is our environmental stresses, that will change what crop type you choose to plant. And I think a lot of farming decisions are still based on what's been done in this area all these years. What are my neighbors doing? I'm just going to do that. But it just takes a little bit of time to just look at your environmental profile and say, okay, I understand my risk is potentially frost. So how can I negate that? And everything, when you look at sustainable agriculture, comes back down to soil. And if you can get your soil environments healthy to sustain the plant to be less stressed, no matter what plant you plant, you're already putting yourself in a better position. And if you know that frost is a potential risk, then you change your planting window slightly. You plant a little bit earlier or a little bit later. If you know that heat stress is becoming a consistent issue in some table grape producing areas, then you either when you do your next planting decision, you plant an earlier ripening cultivar or you plant a later ripening cultivar. So there's so many adjustments that we can make when it comes to sustainable agriculture, but it all starts with understanding your climate risk and understanding how your climate has changed. And I'm a big believer in, there's a lot of climate change forecasts, and it's important to keep a picture and a handle on that. So Hort Grow on their website release a lot of free resources. The Western Cape government releases a lot of free resources on climate change. And actually the Western Cape government has a network of stations that they open up to the public to use. And that's also a nice start to pull some of that data and create GIS maps. So there's a lot of data available that you could look at. What is your climate change scenario for the future? Professor Stephanie Midgley has done a lot of work at the Department of Western Cape to look at where will we sit in 2065 and 2050 when it comes to rainfall patterns and climate change. But my philosophy personally is look back. If you look back on your piece of land and your environment, what's happened over the last 10 years, it will give you a very good idea of what you can expect for the next 10 years. And the best place to start if you're going to start farming in a community is speak to other farmers in the area and say, what's changed? And actually speak to the oldest farmers in the community. Speak to the grandpas and the grannies and say, what's changed? It's always the most interesting conversations. They're like, we used to get frogs in this area at this time and we no longer do because the climate has changed like this and we're getting more wind events in this month. And they are the best climate analysts of an area if you want to start agriculture. Just speak to the older people in the community. That's where the wealth, the richness is on how to be sustainable in agriculture. It's really about talking and community, and anybody can reach out to me and TerraClim at any time. We are available and open to talk and have conversations.
I love that. You've done such a great job at unpacking, I think, what is considered to be quite a complex topic. So thank you so much, Dr. Southey. I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to touch on that you feel is important for farmers to know regarding this topic that we've discussed.
No, I think this is a really important topic in the future. And whenever I do my presentations and I feel limited in taking research to the next level, it's because we don't have GPS locations of what is planted where. Mm-hmm. So if you're a farmer or a farming community, or you run a big farming business, or you're buying products like cabbages from different clients or peaches from different clients, map that on a GIS system. Then you can start stacking climate data on that and terrain information and start seeing how do we position ourselves for future fits. And that's through understanding what works today can work tomorrow. What's not working today, we should not keep pressing in that direction and diversify into different crop types, start thinking differently, start logging your actions. And when we look at the whole carbon conversation, which is extremely complex, difficult to understand, but actually the simplicity of it is just take samples of what is your farming practice today from a regenerative agriculture point of view. What is your carbon footprint today and how are you improving your carbon footprint with time? By the nature of how South Africans farm, we are already more regenerative than most. So starting to measure that and map that is really what I would encourage. And it starts with GIS. It starts with just logging some information. And if GIS and QGIS is too complex, then sign up to a software like TerraClim or sign up to other open softwares that are freely available that you can log information over time and start telling a narrative and empower yourself as a farmer by knowing when you planted, what was your environments. If there was an extreme climate event, to be able to say there was an event, I want to have an insurance claim. It's very difficult to farm today without insurance and very difficult to expand your farming practice without finance. And to have those two, you need to measure and understand your farm. And this is where TerraClim really wants to take hands with anybody in the farming community to help improve how we do things.
A big thank you to Dr. Tara Southey, who is a post-doctoral researcher at Stellenbosch University and the founder of TerraClim. Of course, if you want to know more information about GIS, you can visit www.foodformzansi.co.za, where we do have an article unpacking the information discussed in this episode. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. From me, Patricia Timbo, Our technical producer, Megan van der Vent, and the rest of #team Food for Mzansi, thank you for listening.